Okay. Can you introduce yourself? Like, name.
Brian McCrum,
When were you born?
born April 18th, 1970, in the city of Detroit at St. John's Hospital.
Oh, okay.
To James and Cheryl McCrum.
Cool. Where'd you go to high school?
Went to high school in Marine City High School, in Marine City, Michigan.
Okay. What was your high school like?
High school was small. My graduating class was under 150. Remember correctly, I think it was around 145, 146, somewhere around there. It was a typical high school, I think. It was, being that I was in a farming community, you had well, it had a mix of both farming community and like small town as well. So you had those kids that lived in the outskirts like me, then you had the other kids that lived in the town.
Mm.
You know.
What kind of music did you listen to?
Well, being that I was growing up in the 80s, I listened to a lot of different. I mostly would listen to like Foreigner, Guns N' Roses, Bryan Adams, who else? White Snake. Yes, Van Halen, quite a bit of Van Halen. Def Leppard.
Give me a top three favorite 80s bands.
Top three favorite 80s. Top three bands that I listened to back then were were Guns N' Roses, Van Halen, and then who else?
Motley Crue.
Motley Crue, yes, Motley Crue as well. Yep.
Sorry, I kind of just gave you an answer. Did you play a lot of video games?
We didn't have video games. We had one. I say we didn't have video games. We had a thing that was competed with Atari, and it was called Odyssey, and it had the large cartridges that you had to plug in. The cartridges were about maybe just a little bit smaller than like an 8-track tape, and you had to plug it into the game console. And the games were just, I mean, they don't even compare to nowadays. It's like comparing a stick figure to a Monet. It was just so rudimentary,
Yeah. Did you watch MTV?
We didn't have cable.
You didn't have.
We didn't have cable television. No. All we had was basic television. We had channel 247, channel 50, or channel 20, channel 50, channel 62, and that was it. Those were only over the airwave channels. We didn't have cable. We didn't have satellite. We didn't have any of those. So we watched a lot of MASH and the news and
Good
what
show.
else? Shows that I would watch growing up would be like the A-Team and what else? Oh, the Fall Guy and all that stuff back then.
Did you watch a lot of sports?
I didn't really watch a lot of sports. I wasn't into sports so much growing up. I was more working on cars or being around cars and being outside and working outside around the house and that kind of thing. I didn't play. I played a little bit of sports, but I wasn't very good. I tried.
Yeah. What was your first car?
Your grandma and grandpa. Well, actually, I inherited your Uncle Steve's car, which was a '77 Mustang. So that was the first car I drove to high school. that was white with red wheels and black interior, if I remember correctly. It's in good shape, but it looked like a girl's car, you know.
A Mustang?
It was not very muscly looking. It's just that body style. It was a 77. It just didn't have the, you know, had a 6-cylinder in it and wasn't tough.
Yeah. What was your favorite car growing up? Like, dream car?
Oh, Lamborghini Countach was
Yeah.
your Uncle Steve and I. We always would, I would say fight, but we'd argue over which one was better. He liked the Ferraris, and I liked the Lamborghinis, the Countaches, and we'd always argue over which one's better. You know?
Did you ever go to any concerts?
I didn't go to my first concert until I was probably in my early 20s. Yeah. And I think that was Def Leppard.
Was it fun?
Yeah, it was fun. It was a good time hanging out with all my friends. And I remember, I think we saw them at Detroit Fairgrounds. That's where we saw them.
What like president did you like grow up with?
What president?
Yeah, like.
Well, when I was born, that was 1970. I think that would have been. Would that have been Nixon in 1970? Then it would have been Carter, and then Reagan.
Ford.
Yeah, Ford. I'm sorry, Ford was in there too. And yeah, so it would have been Nixon, Ford, Carter, then Reagan, and then from Reagan it went to Bush 1, and then Clinton. You know the history.
Yeah. Do you remember hearing about the Cold War on the news?
I remember we would do drills. You know, that would be like us going out in the hallway or getting underneath our desks, you know, anything that had to do with, you know, all that. I remember doing that as a kid.
Do you remember hearing about like stuff that was going on in Europe?
Well, I remember when the wall came down between East and West Germany. That was, I think that was what, mid-80s or something like that?
1989.
Yeah, okay, 89. That I remember seeing on the news. But
yeah.
I don't remember a lot of that.
Do you remember John Lennon's assassination?
I should remember that. I mean, he was 82, I think he died.
1980.
1980. I should remember that. I just don't. I wasn't a Beatles fan. My parents weren't Beatles fans, so I mean, it wasn't like something that stuck out in our household. I do remember when Elvis died, though. You know, I remember exactly where I was when he died. That was 1978.
Big deal.
Huh?
Was it a big deal?
Oh, it was huge. It was it was as big, if not bigger, than John Lennon dying.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember driving. We went. My brother and I went with my aunt and uncle and their son. My cousin, it would be. We went to Kings Island.
Where's that?
It's down. I believe it's in Ohio. Yeah, Ohio. So we were on our way back from Kings Island. I remember sitting in their Pontiac and hearing the news that Elvis Presley died. That was in August, I believe, of '78, I think. Yeah, I'll never forget that.
Yeah. So, like, do you remember if you, like, one of the channels you watched got Live Aid? 1985? Or if you watched it?
I didn't watch it when I would have been 15. No, like I said, we only got like local channels. They probably talked about it on local news, but I didn't really, pay too much attention to it. Probably heard about it in high school, but I guess I just didn't pay that much attention to it. No, wasn't on my radar.
Yeah. What do you remember about, like, computers?
I remember that we had Mrs. Berman was the teacher for computers. I remember that.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't take computers. Your Uncle Steve, he did, and he was actually pretty good at it. He was programming stuff back in the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
He learned to do that. I just never got into it. Computers didn't interest me.
Yeah.
But I do remember in high school that they had a computer class and talking about it. And no, I wasn't a very good student. I did like taking drafting though. So
yeah.
Drafting, that was my thing. I'm a visual person, and that's where you get it from.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember skydiving with Uncle Steve?
Yeah, I can tell you that story. That was in 1992.
Mm-hmm.
Uncle Steve had just gotten out of the Marines, and he talked me into going skydiving.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And the day we went, I'd been out drinking with some friends the night before. So that's when I was a little out of control and showed up to the airport that actually was, it butted up next to where I grew up, because the airport was behind our property. Okay, we had 20 acres, and I could see the planes take off and land, and the skydivers come down. Growing up, I could see all of that. So anyway, they have you go through the class. It was a 6-hour class. And they have you sign all these waivers, and one of the waivers, I remember this: are you drunk? And I had to look, or have you consumed any alcohol or anything like that in the last, I think it was like the last 12 hours or something. And I had to literally look at my watch and do the math and say, nope.
Did you lie?
No, I didn't lie. No. I was a little hungover. Wasn't my prouder days in my life, but that was something, especially for someone who has a fear of heights like I do. And then after we did it, I can go deeper into the story, but I had nightmares for like about 3 nights after that, because I had that sense of falling, Yeah, it was something.
Do you remember the Iran hostage crisis?
I do remember that, yeah. I remember correctly. So that lasted like, I can't remember how many.
444 days.
Yeah, okay. I was going to say. I do remember that, and that was always just a huge thing we would always see, because, your grandpa would always watch the news when he got home from work. That was it. Couldn't watch nothing else, and we only had one television in the house.
Mm-hmm.
We might have had a small black and white, but the big TV, your grandpa would take over, and in those days we were the remote. So if you wanted the channel changed, you'd just yell, "Hey, oh, change the channel," you know. And it had the knob, it tick 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 tick, and you had his UHF, VHF, and you had the two knobs, one on top, one on the bottom.
Sounds like a lot of work.
It was, yeah. But yeah, I do remember that. I remember there being like people tying like yellow ribbons around trees and stuff like that. I remember correctly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I do remember some of that. I remember it being on the news and being a real big deal.
Mm. What year did you meet Mom?
Your mother and I met on a blind date in December of '98. So it was a New Year's Eve date.
Oh.
Yeah. So, yeah, so our first kiss would have been, I think, yeah, it would have been January 1, '99.
Crazy. Who set that up, Aunt Lori?
No, it was a couple that we used to hang around with, and I actually stood up in their wedding, and a girl that your mom used to work with was the sister of the couple, one of the people, and they set us up on the blind dates.
Do you remember anything about like international leaders like Sadat or Mikhail Gorbachev? Like learning about them?
I don't remember. I can picture what Sadat looks like. Okay. I don't remember a whole lot about him. They kind of all blend together for me.
Yeah.
And then Gorbachev, I just remember he had that birthmark on his head.
Mm-hmm.
And then Reagan's famous speech, you know,
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. You know, I remember that. But yeah, I don't remember a whole lot about him, and you know, I just don't. You know, I wasn't really into a lot of politics back then. You know,
Mm-hmm.
as a teenager.
Like, do you remember anything about like the War on Terror?
What year are we talking about? Because this has been ongoing.
The 90s.
The 90s. I do remember there being a huge push and military enlistment.
Mm-hmm.
I'd never joined. I wished I had, but I never did. Your Uncle Steve did. But I remember I had friends who joined right out of high school or shortly after high school. And actually, when I was working at the dealership as a mechanic, I remember that one of the guys that I worked with, he went and he was enlisted. I don't remember if he was enlisted, you know, had enlisted while I was there. Anyway, long story short, I remember him coming home, and he brought home some Polaroid pictures,
Mm-hmm.
and these were pretty graphic Polaroid pictures of some of the carnage. You know why he had them, but it just kind of, it was kind of shocking to see it in person, not in person, but here in color in a Polaroid, you
Mhm.
know, and thinking that this guy I work with, I wouldn't call him a friend so much. I mean, you know, we didn't hang out outside of work or anything like that, but I mean, we were kind of, I guess, friends within a dealership, and just to think that this is what he had to endure and see while he was, you know, in country, you
Mhm.
know, was pretty wild. So I mean, I feel for those people that had to had to go through that and see that and be a part of that.
Yeah.
You know, your Uncle Steve, he he did see a little bit of action, okay, but um, he never really had. I don't think had to see, and I never asked him, but I don't think he ever had to really see carnage like that. You know, but yeah, I do. I remember a little bit. I watching it on television, and I mean, but this has been ongoing for decades now. This whole thing, so it's
Mm.
it seems to never end.
Mhm.
It's one of those things that I think there is some validity to it, and this is what someone told me once, and I can't remember who it was. Um, those those people in the Middle East that are doing all this, okay, wish harm upon the U.S. and they brought it to our shores in 2001. So we've seen what they're capable of doing. Okay, but the reason we fight it over there is because we don't want it on our doorsteps here.
Mhm.
We don't want to fight that here.
Yeah.
People don't seem to understand that a lot of times. They don't understand that we go over there to save our people over here. You
Mhm.
know, so that's something to consider.
Yeah. A little less dark. Let's talk about the time that your parents moved, and then Uncle Steve got left in wherever he was, like Guam or Cuba or something, and then they moved, and then they didn't tell him where they moved.
Oh, yeah.
Do you
Well,
remember that?
Steve likes to play it up like he's a victim. Like, well, he was in the Marines, yeah, and I was actually in school in Tennessee, so I was a little bit more informed than he was. But yeah, they decided to move while we had moved out of the house. We're away, so you know,
Where was he at?
I don't know where he was at the time. He'd been stationed in a number of places. He he was in Cuba, Japan, um, Saudi Arabia, California. Um, I believe he was actually in Qatar. He was, I believe, he might have been in Spain, France, because he did some time on a ship in um, in the Mediterranean. Um, so he's been around. He might have been in Guam. I don't remember if he was in Guam,
Mm.
but yeah, he went to a couple places.
Yeah. Okay. What do you remember about 9/11?
Oh, that. I remember that distinctly. I remember that we had. Well, your mother and I got married on September 8th, and we went on our honeymoon in Cancun. And we got there. You know, our first day, we, did the normal touristy stuff. We hung out at the pool, did all the great things. This would have been the 10th, okay, that we were there. Um, and then the next day, it was 9 o'clock in the morning, and I remember I was in the bathroom,
Mm-hmm.
okay, and your mother was, in our hotel room, and your mother was in with the bed area where the beds were at, and hearing your mom yell, "Oh my God!" and she actually saw it on television,
Mm.
you know, and then I came running out of the bathroom to see what was going on. And then when we ended up going, we still went out. We couldn't leave the resort, and everybody who was there already couldn't leave either. Okay, even though their reservations may have stopped. Okay, they were stranded there because they had shut down all flights, you know, for a few days. So yeah, we ended up going, and we went to a club just to try and get our minds off of it. And they were playing that Lee Greenwood, Proud to Be an American. I mean, just it seemed like it was on loop all the time.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
in the club.
How hard was it to get back to America?
It was a more when we got to the airport, all those things that you took for granted were kind of stripped away. You know, like the quickness going through checkout lines. Couldn't. I mean, we left like we had. Your mother had like nail clippers. We had to leave those. Anything that could be perceived as a weapon, we had to leave. I don't remember if we even took shampoos and things like that back. I don't remember if we did, but she might be able to tell you better. But it was just a matter of just bring back the clothes and bare necessities, and be prepared for there to be long lines. You know, because it's an international flight.
Yeah. Any last words?
In what respect?
I don't know. Like about your times, like growing up in like the 70s and 80s.
Things that I have learned, and I think I've shared with you and your sister, that is well, you'll be going to college, okay? So just when I say have a good time, don't get yourself in trouble. Because trouble will follow you the rest of your life. Okay, that, I mean, all it takes is one thing to screw up your life. Okay. Don't forget that even though you may not be the instigator in a situation or in a group, you still can be perceived as guilty by association. Those are things that I have learned.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you.
All right, I love you.
Love you.